here we are. So let me grab my tea. I need my tea to brain properly. So this is Vermeer. Johannes Vermeer, I believe, is his full name. Dutch. And you know Vermeer, whether you know him or not. He painted the girl with the pearl earring. You know, with the blue headdress, yellow. I don't remember off the top of my head, but she clearly has a pearl earring. Same artist. Now, there's some ambiguity to that specific painting, because I don't know if Vermeer was the original painter or he painted another version of it. I don't know the story there, but I want to say someone else, maybe Rembrandt, painted another version of the same thing, and I don't know who did it first. But anyway, Vermeer is great. Oil painter. I'm looking at it, I can pretty confidently say that this is direct painting. It is not indirect, which, this is Vermeer. I want to say it's like 1800s. I don't know for sure. I'm not an art historian. Didn't do enough homework on this to tell you exactly when, but for more for indirect painting to really be the main style or technique, I guess I should say, we'd have to go back further to 1400s, etc. So this is directly painted. First thing that catches my eye is composition, because this might as well just be, X marks the spot. He's very clearly telling you where you should look. So if you look at the baskets all the way down to the right edge of the blue tablecloth, there's a very distinct line going down there. That's one part of our X. The other part of the X is from the side of her face, down the side of her arm, down to the things that are on the table. We have some bread, we have a milk jar, and then essentially the side of the table. Now, I didn't mention the name of this is the Milkmaid. This is a milkmaid in terms of subject matter. But that aside, X, big X. So what's that's doing is it's making your eye, no matter where it's kind of going, it's going to end up in the middle of that X. It's going to end up right there on that wrist and that hand, and your eye is going to spill over just like that milk, and that's the focal point. So for me, composition is, for me, not the most important, but the most interesting part of a painting. And Vermeer was excellent at composition. And the interesting thing is, it's so busy on one side, the other side is very stark, but because there's nothing there, it almost makes it just as visually weighted as all the stuff that's going on the left side. Just because it's solid, it's bright, it's still eye-catching, and there's still something going on the floor. I don't know exactly what that is. It looks like it's some sort of box. I'm not positive. Maybe it's some sort of toy. I'm really not positive. But anyway, composition is awesome. I love it. Now, typically, when you'd be working with an X composition like that, or a cross of any type, usually you end up putting the middle of your X in the rule of thirds, where you basically chop your panel into thirds both ways, and where those lines intersect, there'll be 4 intersections. Where those lines intersect, that's where you kind of randomly put your focal point, or the middle of those X's. Now this is a similar thing, but kind of a step up in terms of sophistication, because rather than using the rule of thirds, which is kind of the easy mode version of placing your focal point, This is using the golden mean, which the golden mean is a ratio. It's kind of, Raquel asks, are you using that technique in your painting? So composition isn't necessarily a technique. And I can talk about my painting in just a second in terms of the rule of thirds or the golden mean. Remind me if I don't talk about it. But the golden mean is a ratio. It's something like 1.4 to 1. It's like a longer decimal than that. But essentially what it is it's a recurring ratio that's found in nature. In things like tree branches, in the segment of where a branch will branch off again, is the golden mean. It's things like rivers and where they branch off. It's just, for whatever reason, it's a very natural ratio. It has a lot to do with fractals and how things just naturally segment on average. And so a lot of painters will make their panels, in the dimensions of the golden mean, the golden ratio. That can be called both. But in this case, in terms of height, he's placed it in the top golden mean. So we have 1 to 1.4. And it looks like horizontally, it's also 1 to 1.4. I'd have to measure it to be sure. But then we have more of a slightly off-center, less traditionally balanced, but more interesting intersection to that focal point. So right off the bat, that is awesome. The next thing that kind of strikes me is how volumetric, how much weight and substance both the figure and the table have. There is no question about, do they look flat? That sometimes you'll hear that, right now my painting looks flat because it's missing a lot of the value in it because I know I'm going to be glazing. But that'll be sorted out. But you can call, my figure flat. This, absolutely not flat. This might as well be a sculpture at this point. You can clearly tell, what form is form. I don't know if that even makes sense, but it's so well done. It has a lot to do with value, with the specific stripes around the sleeves, working what Bob Ross calls the lay of the land, and just the drapery in general, the super clean ellipses on the basket, just making sure that looks round and it's going back in space. It doesn't look wonky or tilted in any way, which is really hard to do with ellipses. So that combined, and it's just a light in general. You can see that there is a window along the left side and that light's coming in, and that is helping really nail that volume and that form. And that's something that I think is overlooked in modern, postmodern contemporary art, is a lot of people are working from photographs because it's just logistically smarter. But when they're taking those photographs, they're either using flash, like a camera flash, or they aren't setting up a dramatic lighting situation. So as soon as you use flash, you're basically lighting everything from one direction, right? Just straight ahead, and you're literally making everything flat. There is no highlights and shadows when you use flash. Everything is illuminated because that's what you traditionally want to see everything when you're taking a photograph. But you lose form and you flatten everything when you do that. So just adding something like just a lamp. If you just take a lamp while you're photographing, for like a reference photo, take a lamp, turn the lights out, and at least capture that lighting. It doesn't need to be that dramatic when you're painting. It's easy to downplay, lighting and make it less dramatic, but it's much, much harder to invent that form from something that's a flat shape. So those two things, I think, are working the best in this painting. For me, something that is this is a personal preference thing, but for me, the color palette, I think is weak. And it's similar to other Vermeer paintings. It's a similar palette. A lot of the ultramarine blues mixed with a more cerulean blue, yellows, greens, oranges. It's kind of jarring to me. I certainly don't dislike the painting because of it, but I think something as simple as changing maybe the cerulean blue of the tablecloth would make a huge difference, and maybe swapping the green with something else in the sleeves. But that's getting real picky. For me, I don't like mixing ultramarine and cerulean blue. There's something kind of awkward about that. But I mean, this at the time, I mean, that ultramarine blue in the drapery, kind of around her midsection, that would be an expensive chunk of paint right there, because that would be pigmented with lapis lazuli, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. But lapis. And it's a precious stone. And even today, there are still paints made with lapis, and they're expensive as hell. And at the time, this was the only thing that, the only way you could get that specific blue. So, other than that, in terms of subject matter, I don't know a whole lot. It's very based in the culture of the time. The milkmaid was kind of a standard, not a standard, but it was during a time when women were treated like second-class citizens. And in this case, the milkmaid was typically portrayed like the mailman, men having affairs with their milkmaids. And a lot of times they were portrayed very distastefully, very erotically. And Vermeer specifically made a tactfully done, respectful portrait giving the milkmaid dignity, which, from what I understand, was very different than other similar paintings at the time. The other interesting thing about this is, if you look close enough, you'll see a similar ambiguous kind of smile, but not really, like you would see on the Mona Lisa. Sometimes it looks like she's smiling, sometimes it doesn't. It really kind of depends on, what you're focusing on. It's not as intense as the Mona Lisa because there's no eye contact, but there's still that ambiguity to it, and that kind of sets the tone. Really, you can almost choose. Do you want this to be like a somber, kind of happy? I don't want to say happy, but kind of relaxed vibe, or is it dark and mysterious and maybe more negative? You can almost choose. You can pretty easily see both. And as you start looking at some more of the details, you may see more things that could sway, your idea of what's specifically going on. But I think that ambiguity makes it interesting to continue looking at. Once you have identified the composition, the color, the overall general vibe, that's when details matter, and that's what's going to keep someone looking at your painting for longer, and that's what really determines the best paintings in the world, in history, is people can still look at them and be interested by them. And this, I think, subject is really pulling that off. I mean, obviously the amazing painting technique. This is directly painted, meaning there's no glazing, there's no letting things dry and painting over them. Unless there's an error or a mistake, then yes, he would let it dry. But it's always wet into wet, and blending colors rather than something like this, which is transparency, layering, getting more, kind of having more control but taking longer kind of thing. So this being directly painted, I mean, you can tell that he is in complete control. So that, I think, is where I'm going to stop for this specific one. I think I rambled on for way too long. I'm interested to hear what you think about this painting, what you get out of it. Do you like the color palette? Do you think I'm stupid because I don't like the color palette? What do you think about composition? Let me know in chat. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Now, Raquel did ask about my composition. I want to just do it real quick because I've mentioned it in the past, but essentially my composition is symmetrical. Now, it's not, you make a line down the middle and then it's mirrored on the right and left. It's not symmetrical in that way. If you take a diagonal line and you start here in the corner and you go all the way up to here, you'll have a line, and it's basically suggested in the leg. And if you make that symmetrical, that's when it starts to make sense if you really think about it, because we have on this line to the left, we have pretty crazy pattern, but it's mirrored by what would typically be the focus of a painting, which is the figure. So you have two segments kind of fighting for that visual weight, that attention. Here, this will be the focal point, which you can't see. It's not painted yet. That's going to be one of the last things I do. But that is essentially, you could call it the rule of thirds. You could probably cut this into thirds, and that's where it would be. It's something that I do think about when I'm placing it is, does it look right? But I'm never actually saying, okay, I'm going to work with the rule of thirds and I'm going to put it right there. That's not really how I work. But if you look down here and you're looking at this axis, here you have this leg, here you have the dress. So you have another mirror here. You have this dark section in the shadow of the chair, and you have the dark section of this figure on those edges. And then you have some other kind of random details where you have dark here with the mask, you have some dark here in the lower part of the dress. And then this white section is almost saying, this line is kind of the edge of the symmetry. Don't try and understand what's over here. And this may look like it's, the primer, but it's not primer. This white is on top of the imprimatura. And this will get sanded down eventually, and I'm going to treat it slightly differently. Right now it's very textured. You can see some of the texture, but I'm not happy with it. I'm going to sand it down, and I'm going to either make it much smoother with some variation. There's going to be some shadows cast, some light cast from this light source. And so this is kind of a resting place for your eye that then leads back into everything. So it's not just a rectangle over here. It still leads into what's going on. And so the idea is this kind of constant spiraling of your eye, which could potentially lead off the edge But I'm thinking that the pattern will bring your eye back in. It's not quite as cool as a big X, like in the Vermeer painting, but certainly a lot of thought went into it in the planning stages of this painting. When I was gathering reference photos and things like that, it wasn't just let's paint some people over here. It's basically I cut things out, I'll move them around in Adobe Illustrator, make sure everything's exactly how I want it, and then I'll paint it. So, do I use that technique in painting? Yes. And it really depends on the painting. It's something that you kind of it's something that you figure out what you want to paint and you kind of place it. And then you say, okay, how can I make this interesting? How can I make things line up? How can I make things, break those lines? And how can I just make it so it looks visually balanced without every individual piece being balanced, if that makes sense? Because you'll see in the next painting that I'm going to react to after I maybe glaze over the hair, you'll see a very different painting that does not really worry too much about composition, and it's just a very rigid portrait. There's no tricky X's in it. It's just a portrait centered. But if you don't focus on composition, then you're able to focus on other things. And where this Vermeer painting was very focused on technique and, composition and lighting, the next one that we take a look at is very focused on the idea, the concept of the painting itself, and what it's trying to say. So, painting number 2, very, very different from painting number 1. And this is Rene, I don't know how you say the first name. I think in English he's typically known as Rene Magritte. But, sorry guys, no, they don't mind. They've seen me, specifically Lenape Medicine has seen me paint more than her fair share. So this Rene Magritte, you may know Magritte from probably his most famous work, which is a painting of a pipe, and it says in French, I believe, this is not a pipe. He's a surrealist. Lenape Medicine says I keep losing you. That is, I can confidently say that is entirely on your end. It sounds like you may be having some internet drops on your end, because my bit rate has not dropped and I have 0 drop frames. So Magritte, this guy is around the same time as your other surrealists. So Salvador Dali. Now, very different in terms of a different type of surrealism. You're not looking at melted clocks and, weird, creepy, floating rock platforms and things like this. Pepper, please stop clawing the wall. Thank you. But still surrealism. And this, for me, I will be very honest with you in that I do not like surrealism, at least this style. Paint a pipe and say this is not a pipe. Now, if you think about it, it's not a pipe because it's a painting of a pipe. So it's a painting. But one second, Pepper is clawing things. She's demanding attention. I'm going to have to lock her out of my studio in a second. But so this, in terms of technique, certainly nowhere near the Vermeer painting. But technique is not the focus, and it's not something that he probably even cares about. about as simple and straightforward of a composition as you could possibly imagine. Rigid guy in a bowler hat with a bird that looks like a dove in front of his face. Now, how is this surrealist? What makes this surrealist? Well, I think my take on what makes this surrealist is very similar to this is not a pipe painting, because this is a portrait, but he's basically saying, yeah, this is a portrait, but I'm not going to show the face, which in most people's, mind, the face is one of the biggest parts of the portrait. It's the most expressive. It's going to tell you the most about the person. And here, it's almost completely devoid of anything that would communicate something about this person. In terms of the pose, obviously you have the attire. So maybe a businessman, he's got a bowler hat, well-dressed. But that's all you get. Now, this was painted, I think, around the same time as another painting that was very, very similar, only I think it was maybe full body or a little longer, and it had an apple obstructing the face. And then there's another one where the face is just missing. You don't see any flesh. It's just like a suit that's standing up by itself with the hat. And I think the idea is the same. In my opinion, those are three identical paintings, even though they're not. But I think that is what makes it surrealism. This is a portrait, but no, I'm not going to give you anything that you typically see in a portrait. Just like the pipe. This is a pipe, but no, it's not a pipe. I'm calling you out to think about the image itself. It's almost adding a layer of cleverness to the act of looking at a two-dimensional image. So it's not trying to fool you into, being in a scene, telling a story. It's specific. The concept is to make you say, wait, this is a portrait? It's not quite as blatant as saying this is not a pipe, but it's the same idea, and that's what a lot of Magritte's work is it's surrealist in terms of the concept, not necessarily the subject matter. Whereas Dali, it's the subject matter. Dali's melting clocks, doing all kinds of weird stuff, and that's what makes it surrealist. But interestingly enough, realism, in terms of a painting genre or movement, has nothing to do with making things representational and look real. Realism actually has to do with, painting like real life. So like painting people, going to work, in the middle of their day, I'm thinking of one painting specifically, where it's, I think, people in like a quarry or something, and it's showing daily life. That's considered realism. If you're talking about, making someone look like they're real, that's representationalist, or a high level of representation. And it's not necessarily a style, like realism is. So when you talk about surrealism, you're saying it's either, above or completely different from what is real, what is really happening, what's the daily, embodiment of just life, like your day-to-day life. So surrealism doesn't necessarily mean things don't look real, or that in this case those are real things that are being painted. It's just that it's playing with the idea of realism and making it something different. So one thing that I can tell you about Rene Magritte is that a lot of his paintings have to do with covering up the face. And he had a traumatic incident when he was young. And I'm guessing, I think a lot of people kind of came to the conclusion that it's because his mother drowned when he was very young. And when he saw her, her face was covered because, you know, they didn't want him to see her face. And a lot of his work comes from it. It's the expression of that trauma. And he found a way to do it that wasn't, you know, I guess, morbid, like it could have been, you know, but that surrealistic attitude was kind of just the outcome of that horrible incident that happened early on in his life. So whether it's a bird or an apple or the face is just missing, it's really just, it's kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm so bad at words. I'm going to need your help. But when something is like a joke or making fun, satire, there we go. It's like the equivalent of like satire. You know, this is a painting, but it's not a portrait, even though it is, but it's not. So in terms of like technique, I mean, one thing that I think is done extremely well in this is the variation in the background. That solid shape, if you look at that closely, there's some great color variation, value variation, thick and thin paint variation. It's pretty great. It's warmer on the right side, goes more cool as you go to the left, and darker. And you'll see that there's a little tiny sliver of more intense blue around the arms. And I think that adds quite a bit. It does kind of make a square, you know, from the collarbone up. It's a square, and then the rest is this blue color, the dark, more saturated blue color. And I think that's important. Otherwise, you wouldn't get that very clear breakdown of shape and kind of sectioning of the painting. So you could kind of see that as, you know, the X in the Vermeer painting. Rather than an X, you just have a straight line at the collarbone, making a square on top and a longer rectangle on the bottom. So two very different things. My preference is Vermeer. This kind of satire, surrealistic thing. I think it's clever, but it's not something that I can continue looking at for a long time. Now, maybe you could, if this is in person, I'm sure that that bird is very well painted. It looks like there's a lot of detail in those feathers. Looks very well done in terms of form. But like I said, I like it. I'd look at it, but certainly would never buy it if I had the money. I would probably buy really almost anything else. I'm trying to make more standalone videos. I made one specifically about color theory. I'll have a channel, or not a channel, but a playlist about color theory. I'll have a playlist reacting or reviewing random paintings. And hopefully can make significantly more interesting videos. So if you missed any of that, check out YouTube in the next few weeks. There's a bit of delay, but anyway, thank you. Please follow. If you liked what you saw, follow on Twitch. Please consider, if you're interested, if you want more, you get a notification when I'm painting, and everybody's happy. Subscribe on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram and a bunch of other random stuff, but I don't really follow up on it. So as long as you're on Twitch or YouTube, you'll be in on all the intense painting action. So thanks a lot. I had a blast. Hope you did too. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Later.